Hello, welcome to another Odd Commander deck tech. In a previous video I explored Caves, a non-basic land type with very little support, and found a strategy that works well for them. I'm determined to run this experiment for some of the other non-basic land types, so here we go. Can we make a functional deck with the Locus lands? If you're unfamiliar with the Locus lands, there are a total of 3 non-basic lands with the Locus land type: Cloudpost, Glimmerpost, and the newly printed Trench Post. Each one has an ability that cares about the number of locuses on the battlefield. These lands work incredibly well if you have a bunch of them, but unfortunately for us, we're building a commander deck and we can only have 1 copy of each for a maximum of 3 locus lands in the deck. If you look at Cloudpost generates a mana for each locus on the battlefield. So 3 mana for 1 land to generate is a lot for a land, but it doesn't really provide a strong foundation for a deck. On top of that, there's only a single other card that mentions locuses, which is Monument to Perfection, which can search for locuses and can turn into a very lethal creature if we have 9 unique locuses, basics, and spheres, which is another non-basic land type we'll talk about another time. Technically, we could build this deck and try to have this as the win con. But then we have to find a way to get it to the battlefield, find a way to damage all of our opponents, find a way to give them another poison counter since it's only Toxic 9, and we have to do it all before they find a way to remove this indestructible artifact creature. It's a lot of build around, and for something that Maze's End just does better, so we're not going to build this deck right now, but we will include Monument to Perfection in the deck since it's good at finding locuses. We'll save this insane build around for this card for another video. Another option, which I think goes without saying for a lot of non-basic land deck strategies, something I didn't talk about before, is to just use Omo to put everything counters on things and turn them into every non-basic land type, including locuses. I feel like it's a pretty good tool for a lot of the decks, but it is the most obvious way to build it, and I want to try something different from the normal that doesn't involve Omo at all. So here's my idea. It revolves around Cloudpost, which I would consider is the best of the 3 locus lands. I mean, you could focus on a mill strategy with Trench Post, but I think the stronger one is Cloudpost. What if we found a way to copy it? If we had 2 Cloudposts, that's already tapping for 4 mana, and if we had 3, it'd be 9 mana. So we're getting an amount of mana that's equal to the number of Cloudposts that we have squared. If we have 20 Cloudposts, we can tap for 400 mana, and that's exactly what we're going to aim to do. Now, the commander that we've chosen is an option that I've personally never built with, but is an incredibly popular option for competitive commander. I've chosen Thrasios, Triton Hero, as our commander. Thrasios has partner. I can think of no better partner for this deck than Kamahl, Heart of Krosa. We are using Thrasios for exactly what you'd expect to use him for, as a mana sink. With enough mana, you can go through your entire deck and get whatever win con you want. 400 mana, to be exact, will get you 100 cards. Okay, so technically you're not going to have 100 cards in your deck, so 19 Cloudposts, which is 361 mana, is enough to get through a 90 card deck, which you are going to have after your first draw, so really you only need 19, but I love how 400 mana and 20 Cloudposts sounds, so we're going to go with that. Anyway, all this to say, I just wanted to preface you here that this is the kind of Thrasios deck where you can definitely show up to a table of casual players and say, this is not the Thrasios deck that you think you've seen, and you would be right. Kamahl is here to provide some consistency for what the rest of the deck is doing. Our goal is to copy lands, which is actually decently hard. There isn't a ton of support for that, so we're going to first turn them into creatures, and then copy them, which is a much easier task but requires more build around. Once we have enough Cloudposts, we'll be able to dig through our deck and find a win con, so let's get into the tech and see what we are working with. Like I mentioned, we're going to want to animate our lands before we can easily copy them. So Kamahl does a pretty good job already, but let's add some more redundancy and efficiency because Kamahl is pretty expensive. Destiny Spinner adds a bit of protection in making some of our spells uncounterable, including our commander, which is pretty important, and it provides an animation effect. Jolrael, Voice of Zhalfir, will animate something during combat, so it's a consistent once per turn trigger and it can draw us some cards. Llanowar Lone Speaker is both a mana dork and a land animator. Nature's Revolt, Rude Awakening, and Sylvan Awakening will turn all of our lands into creatures, which is useful if we have something that takes multiple targets. Nissa Vital Force untaps and animates a land every turn, or we can use it for some recursion or the draw emblem from its ultimate. Nissa, Who Shakes the World, also animates a land every turn, but has the potential to make our lands indestructible, which is pretty nice protection. And it makes our forest tap for extra mana, which is some nice ramp. Waker of the Wilds will permanently turn a land into a creature, which is really nice. And Sylvanas' Invoker is my absolute favorite version of this effect in the deck because it goes infinite if we have at least 8 Locuses, with one being a Cloud Post. It can continuously untap the same Cloud Post, and it turns it into a creature, which makes it easier to copy. So this will allow us to get infinite mana, and then we can pump that mana into our commander or one of our win cons. Next, let's talk about the ways that we have to copy Cloud Post. Simic is pretty good at copying, and there are a ton of options, so I went with options that either made multiple copies, made copies repeatedly, were super efficient, or were lands themselves. First, we have copiers that can make copies of any permanent, which is the most useful kind since we don't have to rely on a land animator being out to use them. The all-star, and the one that will for sure get us there, is Doppelgang. Since it's also a mana sink, the ceiling is really high for this effect. If we have 4 Cloud Posts and a way to generate 2 more colored mana, Doppelgang turns our 4 Cloud Posts into 20, which is our target. Any more than that will net us n+1 times more Cloud Posts than we had before. It's brilliant. This is the perfect deck for this kind of card. Orvar the Alv form is another really handy engine for copying. Every time we cast a spell that targets one of our lands, we get a copy of it. Next, we have copiers that make copies of tokens, regardless of the permanent type. There are a lot more of these, and we're more flexible with our options here. City of Death will give us a new copy every turn for 5 turns, and it's really useful even if you just are copying the treasure because that's ramp. Essica's Chariot will give us a token every time we attack. For the Common Good is another mana sink that will get us a new token for every 2 mana that we put into it and gain us some life. Rootcast Apprenticeship copies a token 3 times if we don't want to use any of the other modes for anything. And Second Harvest copies every token that we control. We of course have Vesuva and Thespian Stage, 2 ways of copying a land with a land permanently. And then the last type of copier is ones that are just really efficient ways of copying creatures. Replication Technique gets us 2 tokens for the price of letting one of our opponents copy something too. Similarly, Tempt with Reflections gets us a token, potentially 4 tokens if our opponents chooses to copy things. They're probably not going to choose that, but it's still a pretty good option for this. Rite of Replication gets us 5 tokens if we have enough mana for the kicker, which is really, really good here. And last, we have Springheart Nantuko. It's really interesting because if our Cloud Post could tap for green mana, it would go infinite, but it doesn't. We bestow an animated Cloud Post with the Nantuko, and then whenever we copy a Cloud Post, we can pay 2 and copy it again, as many times as we have mana. Making a lot of green mana isn't as easy as copying Cloud Posts, but it's definitely possible in the deck with cards like Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, or a mana filtering artifact like Energy Refractor to let us get green mana from our Cloud Posts. Now let's cover the win cons, which mostly come in the form of mana sinks. Our commanders are both good options for mana sinks, especially Thrasios that we want to pour a whole bunch of mana into, but neither of them outright wins us the game by activating them. We need to dig to find something that will win us the game. There are ways to make this process more efficient, which are definitely welcome here. Biomance's Familiar and Training Grounds both reduce the cost of activating abilities, making the bar for how many Cloud Posts we need to win lower. Blue Sun Zenith and Finale of Revelation will draw us cards for how much mana we pump into them, which is more efficient than Thrasios paying only 1 mana per card rather than 4. One way that we can win is to get big creatures and swing with them. Since we have a way to make our Cloud Posts into creatures, we can utilize cards like Finale of Devastation and Blackblade Reforged to make them, or our commander, big enough to end someone. I think the most surefire way that we have to win is Ambassador Laquidus, which will let us mill 3 for every 3 mana we put into it. This will allow us to mill out our opponents and hopefully win the game right there. The last way, which kind of feels like a meme to me, is Dark Depths. Yes, we have Thespian Stage, so we could turn it into Dark Depths and get Merit Lage very quickly. And in fact, in playtesting this deck, that happened way more often than you would think. But with the abundance of mana that we have, it's actually not going to be hard to pump 30 mana into Dark Depths and get a 20/20 out of nowhere. Merit Lage doesn't win the game on the spot, but it is scary and is going to look really fun when you pull that out. Alright, so that's the main package of the deck. I've included some other areas of utility that will help us be more consistent with our wins. One of those areas is untapping. We saw with Sylvanas' Invoker that we can make a ton of mana by repeatedly untapping a land, and I think that this will help us get our win cons by allowing us to have the mana to either pay for Thrasios' ability to dig, or to pay for copy spells. There's not a ton of variety here, though. We have Argothian Elder, Krosan Restorer, Ley Druid, and Voyaging Satyr that all essentially do the same thing. They untap a land or multiple lands on activation, and that's once per turn. Stonecedar Hierophant untaps whenever a land enters, so we can activate it multiple times in a turn if we have a whole bunch of lands entering. Horizon Explorer is basically Amulet of Vigor that also makes us lander tokens, so that's really helpful. And then we have Magus of the Candelabra that can untap any number of lands, which will essentially double our mana with how much mana our lands are going to be generating. Next, we have tutor cards that can help us find Cloudpost. I don't have a ton in here, mostly because of the ability to dig being very strong with the deck, and that helps us find one of these cards if we need to. We previously mentioned Monument to Perfection, which is great because it continues to be useful at finding lands after we find Cloudpost. Then we have Expedition Map and Urza's Cave, which we sacrifice to find a land, Sylvan Scrying and Reap and Sow for spells, Ulvenwald Hydra that has the added benefit of being huge if it continues to stick around, and Tempt with Discovery, again letting our opponents choose if they want to have lands and let us ramp at the same time. In any case, it can help us at least find Cloudpost. Let's race through the rest of our utility pieces. Starting with draw, we've covered everything except for a Windfall that I've included to help cycle through an unhelpful hand. For recursion, to get our lands back if we lose them, we have Crucible of Worlds, or any suitable play land from Graveyard Permanent. There are like a lot of them now. Life from the Loam, that's really easy to recur, and Regrowth, which can get anything back. We have Heroic Intervention and Lightning Greaves for one-off or single target protection. For interaction, we have 3 counterspells, a Beast Within for targeted removal, and a Flood of Tears to return all non-land permanents to hand, which is a great board wipe that doesn't affect our land strategy very much. I imagine that if you need more interaction than this, then you can swap out some of the land animation pieces because you do have that in the command zone already. Well, there's another non-basic land type down. I really love this deck, and I'm so happy with how it came together. Which non-land basic type would you like covered next? Let me know in the comments. I will see you next time.